The entire story that we are being told by the seemingly supernatural beings living in this town literally does not make any sense whatsoever. And there is something that is revealed to us in this specific moment right here with Fatima that gives us proof that we are being deceived by the evil forces of the town in more ways than we can ever possibly imagine.
I saw what they did. It promised them that they would live forever. They sacrificed their children.
What we see in this scene is one of the biggest hints that everything we have ever seen in this story has clearly been a lie. Because this is just one of many hints given to us by the writers that this entire story is being completely controlled by the entity in control of the monsters. And in order for me to really explain how we know this to be true and factual, you need to understand how ridiculous the idea that the Nightwalkers willingly sacrificed their children to become what they are today actually is. Because there's so many signs that not only were they not aware of what they would become, but that they were forced into the supposed child sacrifice so that they would undergo a transformation and become soldiers for and basically slaves to the entity himself. And one of the biggest hints to this obviously being the case is we've literally never seen any of the Nightwalkers having conversations with each other. This matters much more than you think, because what it really means is that their cognitive abilities are being limited by an outside force, which is obviously the entity himself. The reason why it's important to understand this is that it means that the Nightwalkers do not have control over their actions. Basically, they are not making the choice to go after and torture the people of the town. The choice is being made for them. And this is why I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to show you, as it directly ties into why we know for sure that we are being manipulated into believing a lie by the evil forces living in this town.
My blood is your blood now.
Now, this right here is one of the biggest clues that the narrative that we are being fed here about the child sacrifices is complete nonsense, and that this entire thing from top to bottom has been engineered by demons to get a very specific reaction from the humans living in this town. And this right here is a perfect example of what I'm trying to tell you. Like, I want you to look at what's on the screen right now, and I want you to tell me what is the first thing that you notice about what you're looking at. Well, for me, what stands out the most here is that this being was born smiling, despite the fact that the last time he was alive, we saw him screaming to death at the top of his lungs. The reason why I have to point this out specifically is just imagine hypothetically that you yourself had experienced such a violent death as Smiley did, and you were suddenly brought back to life. You wouldn't immediately wake up smiling like the Joker after your resurrection. You'd be asking, what the hell happened? Why am I in the underground tunnels? Oh wow, you're saying that I actually died? That's crazy. How did you guys even bring me back to life? Those are the questions that you would be asking in this situation, because that is how a normal human mind would actually react to being resurrected after experiencing such a violent death. This matters a lot because it's even more evidence of something that we should have already known from the very beginning of this story, and that is that the Nightwalkers are clearly not in control of their bodies or their minds. Because what we're really seeing here with the Smiley is proof that the Nightwalkers have simply been implanted with the basic set of instructions that has been placed into their minds that they default to during their day-to-day lives whenever they see the townspeople engaging in specific actions. And this is why they are constantly smiling when we see them randomly walking around or when they're about to attack the people of the town. It's all a part of their programming, and they can be updated and downgraded by the system, i.e. the entity himself, whenever he deems it necessary for a specific goal. It's very important for this story for us to understand that they are not in control of their bodies, as this one simple fact completely changes everything that we think we know about this story. Because once you start considering all of these obvious facts, it starts to become clear to us as the people living in this town that the Nightwalkers themselves are also victims of the entity in control of the monsters. And this brings me to something else that I really want you to think about, and to give me an answer that actually makes sense and is logical. And that question is very simple. Do you believe that it makes sense that the type of person that would be willing to sacrifice their children to gain immortality would be content and happy to be living in this damp and dirty cave like a filthy animal for 500 plus years? No. It does not make any sense, because the type of person who would do such a thing is highly ambitious, usually in the specific aspect of gaining power over society. This is not the same thing as sadism, which is what we actually see from the monsters living in the town.
It's laughing at you for setting it free, for bringing it back to town. It wants to make us suffer.
A sadistic being, like the entity in control of the monsters, gets off on the suffering of others, so he intentionally creates situations where he can make people suffer. But an ambitious person does not kill other people because he gets off on it. He takes them out specifically because they're standing in the way, therefore preventing him from reaching something that he desires, which is usually societal power. You need to understand that there is no direct correlation between ambition and sadism, because it matters significantly for us to understand what's really going on in this story, because the seemingly ambitious people that supposedly sacrificed their children would not be happy living the lives that we see from the Nightwalkers. And this is just one of the many holes in the child sacrifice narrative that was given to us by Fatima, which is highly questionable in the first place, because this information was implanted into her brain by the kimono demon, who has already been proven to not only be a liar, but to also be working with the entity in control of the monsters, which means he is obviously not an unbiased or even a reliable source in any way. So I am not even convinced that these children were ever sacrificed by the Nightwalkers in the first place. But even if you want to believe what he implanted into Fatima's brain, this story still doesn't describe people who sacrificed their children out of either ambition or sadism. It describes a group of people who were forced to sacrifice their children because they felt an incredible level of desperation to end their suffering that they were being perpetuated to, likely for even decades, by the hands of an incredibly vile demon that we now know as the entity who created the town. The actual reality of what we see from the Nightwalkers is the complete opposite of the child sacrifice that the entity wants us to believe. The Nightwalkers are clearly not in control of their bodies, which means, just like everyone else, they were also manipulated, tortured, abused, and ultimately deceived by the entity. And this makes sense, because no one here is free. They have all been imprisoned by the entity. And this brings me to something else that is a major hint that everything we have ever been told from the very beginning of this story is obviously a lie.
I heard the voices. They want you to know that she's afraid and that something took her. They know you won't find her in time. They were laughing.
Now, this scene is one of the most important in the entire show, as it directly ties into the most consistent plotline in this entire series. And of course, that is that the evil forces of the town have completely rigged the game to make sure that we can never win. Because notice how Sarah specifically uses the word they to refer to the beings who were laughing at the townspeople because they knew they would never be able to get to Fatima before Smiley was reborn. She doesn't say it is laughing like she says in other scenes. She specifically says they. So this is a group, not an individual like in some of the other times that we see the voices talking to Sarah. This is very important because it implies that there are other beings who are not the Nightwalkers that are working with the entity to destroy the people of the town. And it's very obvious to me that these voices clearly belong to the Ankui children, because even when you really think about it, it was one of these same demonic children that ended up rolling a rock down in the underground tunnels to wake the Nightwalkers up so that they could defend themselves from Tabitha and Victor. And this is just one of the many obvious clues that they've always been working hand in hand with the monsters. Like, these voices were laughing at the people of this town because something had taken Fatima and she was suffering because of it. Obviously, they were talking about the kimono demon. But what I really want you to focus on here is that this is not the facial expression of a child that has been enslaved, imprisoned, tortured, and eventually sacrificed by her own parents. To me, this face says the exact opposite, that this child is the one doing the torturing. And before you start raging out because of what I just said, I want you to answer a very simple question. If you asked your 5 or 6-year-old daughter or son to play with this child, what would they tell you? They would refuse to do it. And why is that? Because they can tell that the child is clearly evil and is therefore a threat to their safety. And so what I'm saying is not about this one child specifically. It applies to all of them, because all of them were incredibly happy while they were being sacrificed to the root of evil. And this scene is a perfect example of how badly we have been manipulated by the entity, because the idea that the emotion you would be feeling while you were being sacrificed to a demon would be hope is completely ridiculous on its own. Like, take a second to think about this. These children were not feeling rage or anger or confusion or what you would actually be feeling in this moment, which would be fear. Instead, they were feeling hopeful. And this just shows us what I'm trying to tell you. The entity is not even making an effort to deceive us. We are doing all of the work for him by filling in the gaps with our own headcanon to justify the absolutely massive holes in the story that he keeps telling us. It's like how people, even to this day, are absolutely adamant that the kimono demon is trying to help us because we never saw him killing anybody on screen. Even though the demon he resurrected is going to kill millions of people for him before the sun ends up exploding and taking the earth with it. It's laughable. We are the ones giving him the tools to manipulate us because we feel lost and therefore desperate for meaning in our lives. So he creates a role for us in his story, The Quest to Save the Children Locked in the Tower. Oh, won't somebody save the children locked in the tower? The children aren't even in the tower. They're in the tunnels where the monsters have been sleeping in this entire time. And this is just one of the many signs that we are being deceived in so many ways that it is impossible for us to truly comprehend what's going on here. Like, even when you look at the giant doll monsters in the season 4 trailer, it's very obvious that the entity wanted us to find them and that he set everything up to make sure that we would. So go watch this video right here where I talked about how we know for a fact that he deceived us into bringing them back to life so that he can use them to torture the people of this town.